Well, hello everyone. I am Jacob Winograd. You're live here with me in the LCI green room. Sorry, we had a little bit of a break, 1 or 2 week break, kind of lost track. But beginning of the year, kind of take a little bit of downtime and spend some time with the family throughout the holidays, a little bit afterwards, and getting back into the full swing of things here. Tonight's live stream is going to be another one of the spaces that I have participated in the past with the Christian Caucus, of which I am a co-founder of, and I'm very excited for tonight's subject. It is on ICE, immigration, and sort of the national tensions and controversies. So I'm going to go ahead and get that set up here. For those of you in the chat, if you could give me some kind of thumbs up or just a confirmation that you can hear everything once I have it set it up, I would appreciate that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start listening here.
Hi, Amity.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So Jacob said he's going to be joining.
Can you guys hear the X
take him a
space?
couple minutes
Let me know
to get his streaming situated, but I think it was the three of us last time when we did a space and it had some problems. He said he's figured those out, so hopefully it'll go pretty smooth. And there he is. So I'm gonna invite him up. Hey, Jacob.
Hey, can you hear me?
Oh yeah.
Hey. We have that's much better than last time. We did that can you hear me now game for about 10 minutes last time.
Does that mean you're good to go already?
Yeah, I'm good to go. I'm already streaming to the YouTube and all that, so I'm ready to go whenever you guys are.
Right on. Cool. Well, we can just start jumping into it then. I'm Kara from the Christian Caucus, and the Christian Caucus goals is to influence the Libertarian Party for Christ, and also bring
By the way, I
principles
will
of
read super
liberty
chats
to
on the
the
YouTube at
body
the
of
end,
Christ,
guys.
to the
Okay,
church, and to
appreciate
others.
that. I see
So
one's already there.
one thing
I don't want to
that
interrupt
has been
the
coming up
spaces with them, but
recently
I will
is, of course,
hang
all the
out after the
tensions
spaces
with
ends and
immigration and
respond to read all
ICE.
the super
There's been
chats.
shootings and all kinds of stuff going on, and a lot of flared up discourse all around. And it's hard on Twitter or X or any of the other platforms to really have good conversation about this, because it's, there's a lot of context and nuance and trade-offs in all of this. And so I think what Amity and Jacob and I are hoping is that we don't all three agree 100%, but we're all coming to this with Christ as our foundation, and we all value liberty. So I think it would be nice to kind of like round out some of these things that are going on from various perspectives, and like with also the intention of showing like it's okay to disagree, and it's like important to understand and try to understand genuinely where other people are coming from, and not just taking on the worst arguments of people we disagree with. I'll throw in there too, as the Christian Caucus, we're not, coming up with an official stance and, statement, because I think there is room for some variation in stances on this and positions. And so, and Jacob and I spoke about that earlier, and yeah, he can add some more to that. And if you guys want to introduce yourself and give any kind of like opening remarks, that'd be great. And then we can start getting into some topics.
Well, I would say ladies first. Amity, do you want to go?
Sure, I'll go. I'm Amity. I'm a Catholic and libertarian political activist, and I spend most of my time on X trying to push the needle of liberty and educate people on why government solutions are not the best solutions. With regard to, actually, before I get started, if everybody could please repost the space, it'll reach a wider audience, and we would appreciate that to have more people listening and joining the conversation. I know that my views may not be the same as other Christians who have different views. I know we have a wide political spectrum represented in the Christian community. As far as mass deportation goes, I feel like it violates the inherent dignity of the human person. Every human being is made in the image of God, regardless of legal status, and policies that treat people as units to be removed rather than families, workers, and neighbors elevate the power of the state over conscience and mercy. Enforcing laws without due process or concern for human suffering is not justifiable. And I feel like that's what this administration is doing right now. Mass deportation is also the state at its most bloated and coercive. It requires expansive surveillance, militarized enforcement, warrantless raids, asset seizures, routine violation of property rights and free association. And most people will tell me that only citizens have constitutional rights, but that's just not true. The people that are within our borders have constitutional rights. So, mass deportation also, in my opinion, forces taxpayers to fund violent removal of peaceful people whose only quote unquote crime is often just paperwork. A government power uh, who can round up millions without individualized justice is powerful enough to do the same to its citizens. Um, the military is already testing kinetic drone swarm right here in Florida with explosive drones coordinating and striking targets. Will they begin to use this technology on protesters is my question. That's something that I'm extremely fearful about. With the way things are going, I really wouldn't put it past them. Federal immigration officers are now entering private residences without a warrant or judicial authorization. This undermines the Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. I'll make it, I'm almost done. I had a couple things I just wanted to hit on before I forgot. Every time ICE detains an innocent person out of lack of due diligence instead of doing real investigative work, violent criminals who they should be focusing on remain free. They turn around and Congress just threw another $6 billion at refugee programs and claim that the problem's being solved. If they're deporting everyone, then why would they need more funds to promote welfare for immigrants, is my question. So I just feel like a just society distinguishes violent criminals from peaceful working people and resists policies that makes cruelty a feature rather than a failure. Our immigration system is very broken, and hard workers, I feel like, need a path to legal status rather than being treated like criminals. You don't have to deny borders or laws to oppose mass deportation. I certainly don't. You just have to believe that all humans have inherent worth, and a government that forgets that has no respect for liberty. And so that's what I'm pushing for. I'm pushing to educate the population on human dignity for all people, rather than just subsets, whether it's citizens or different groups that you may agree with.
Thanks, Amity. That was really good. I wrote down some notes too, because I really liked a lot of stuff you said. But we'll get back to that in a minute. I'll let Jacob go ahead and Jacob, you can make like general remarks, or you can go into topics like Amity did if you'd like, broadly about immigration, or you could do both.
Yeah, of course. I'm just, for those who don't know, I guess, I'm Jacob Winograd. I host the Biblical Anarchy podcast, which is with the Libertarian Christian Institute. I also write for them as well, articles, and actually in the process of publishing my first book with them. And yeah, I agree with a lot of what Amity said, obviously. I think that I'm often trying to approach all of these subjects with a couple things in mind. I really want Christians I mean, all people, but really Christians, especially, this is pertaining to how we do politics informed by scripture. And we need to have a working theory of what distinguishes sinful behavior from criminal behavior. We would probably agree that, all criminal behavior through a biblical lens is going to be sinful behavior, but we would hopefully agree that not all sinful behavior is criminal behavior, because not only does that not logically follow from scripture, but just the implications of that is just a totalitarian nightmare that can't possibly work without just constantly using government force to compel us at every waking moment to, for every single thought crime, and whenever we get angry, whenever we lie, whenever we don't love our neighbor the right way or love God as much as we should. So I think people agree with that in a general sense, but when it comes down to actually the rubber hitting the road and defining, what's the limiting principle, people have a hard time coming up with something that's consistent. And yet, while I think doing this sort of philosophical, political, uh, you know, odyssey is important, I also think that we need to find ways to then not become ideologically captured in a way where we're not effective in the world. I think that it is a slippery slope, of course, to want to operate within the political realm and to seek compromises and to kind of work for what can be done, because I think we could all just think of the ways in which people do that, and they just, end up, even if they have the best of intentions, they just end up like not either not getting anything done, or they get things done, but it's just so watered down and there's so much compromise that they can actually end up participating in doing evil. And I think, scripture tells us as Christians to not participate in the unfruitful works of darkness, but to expose them. And so that's a very, I don't think it's a legalistic thing, but but just in a, living it out, there's a danger of doing nothing in the world because you're too afraid of making a mistake, or everything seems like there's not a good path forward. But then obviously you can compromise too much when you're trying to find ways to operate in the real world. I'm really interested in trying to work that problem out. I don't know that I have that problem worked out. I just know that there's a tension there, and that it seems like too many people want to resolve that tension by either living comfortably in just sort of the abstract, or throwing the abstract out. And I don't think we should do that. As it pertains to immigration, you know, I've I'm I feel like people will often come with assumptions about what my views are. I'm not uh a open borders absolutist. I mean, I'm an ANCAP, so I don't even believe in state borders, if you really want to get into it. I think that that's, my principles. Now, if we're talking about policy, that's sort of a case by case basis, and sort of evaluating, is the policy at the federal level, is it at the state level, and what's it going to take to make this policy come about? How does this policy compare to the status quo? I'm open to some forms of compromise, in terms of like something that is not a totally open, unrestricted border in the here and now, because I think something that open borders advocates, both libertarians and those on the left, do, which I think is just wrong and a disservice to talking about the virtues of free movement and free trade, is to sort of pretend that there are no negative consequences or externalities to that sort of open migration system, especially in the status quo, and also to pretend that there isn't, forces uh, in the sort of current ruling apparatus that have intentionally sought to create demographic change in Western countries and America through not just allowing free movement of people, but through intentionally funneling people from the second and third world, into our Western societies. And this does create a civilizational dilemma. And it's also a dilemma for those who care about liberty, because if you think Americans don't value liberty, well, that's true, but we tend to value it more than a lot of other places in the world. And so we're trying to deal with a way of, again, bridging that gap between theory and praxis. And I think that we're not going to get anywhere if we pretend these problems don't exist. So, but at the same time, even though I'm not going to be an absolutist when it comes to policy, and I'm open to talking about things, th- that doesn't mean I'm going to become a cheerleader for, ICE raiding apartment buildings and shooting American citizens and shutting down free speech and restricting calls for further restrictions on gun rights and infringements on the Second Amendment and the complete abolition of due process and just so many things. And again, this is the whole theory. I'll end on this. The whole theory praxis dichotomy cuts both ways. It does cut towards people who are very, ideological and insistent on sticking to principles to sort of call them out and say like, okay, but if your solution is we basically do nothing and just wait for the state to disappear, that doesn't seem like the right thing to do. But on the other hand, I do think some people, conservatives and libertarians, have sort of done the opposite where they haven't considered like if the goal is to deport 30 million people, what does that actually entail? What is the political and human and economic cost to even attempt to make that happen? And so we have to weigh both ends of that ledger there. And so I hope we can get into some, again, fruitful conversation tonight. I'm not interested in doing the whole like I'm the most consistent libertarian here, and just kind of falling back on talking points. I think immigration is one of the most nuanced and complicated issues to talk about from a libertarian perspective, and even as Christians, I think there's some tensions there to explore. And I hope that we can kind of showcase tonight a way to talk about these things in a way that is edifying, that's building bridges, that's challenging each other where we disagree, but doing so in a way that's good faith and productive. So,
Thanks, Jacob. So I think one thing we had thought about for starting was just kind of a broad view. And Amity, you did kind of touch on this a little bit already. But as far as immigration, what is from your perspective, how should the immigration process look? And also, if you could be like talk about this administration and what they're doing, if you see anything positive, and of course, like what you see negative, if there's stuff that you haven't touched on yet in that regard.
Sure. So I know we don't live in a utopia. And of course, as libertarians, we're always talking about philosophies of, the best world and, the best way to that things should happen. And it's not going to be that way. But for my perfect world, we would have, uh, well, my perfect world would be free movement of people, you know, people who want to employ others can employ who they want. There should be no government involvement in free markets and, people doing business. But from a realistic perspective, I would like to see the immigration look kind of like Ellis Island, where if you come here, you have no violent criminal background, you have no communicable diseases, and you have a way to support yourself, you should be able to come here and make a life for yourself. Now, that would entail ending the welfare state. And I know that American citizens utilize welfare more than immigrants do. However, 60% of the migrants who have come here in the last few years receive some sort of welfare benefits. So if that ended, it would disincentivize people from coming here in the first place. I think if you can support yourself and make a life for yourself, you should be able to. Now, as far as the administration goes, I know that, that President Trump promised deport them all, deport them all. But he also mentioned, focusing on violent criminals first. And I feel like in the beginning of his administration, he kind of lost the plot on that until he realized that a lot of people in Mar-a-Lago were getting deported. And he kind of changed course on workers in the hospitality industry and things of that nature. He's recently come out and said that he will be focusing more on violent criminals and not on mass deportations. He said this just last week, and I hope he will stick to that because, again, like I said in my opening comments, if someone's here just peacefully living and working, and wants a better life, and they are not causing any harm, and their only quote unquote crime was to not file the proper paperwork, then they should have an opportunity to be, tax paying citizens and pay into the system that we're under right now. Now, I don't agree with taxation in general, but as long as we have it, then the more people paying into that system, the better off we are.
Thanks, Amity. And then Jacob, you can go, and then I want to introduce Daniel and get some thoughts from him as well.
Sure. Yeah, I think that it would be so sensible to start with criminals first if we were talking about like a need to deport anyone. And so, someone in the live chat here on the YouTube said something which, lines up kind of with what my view is, which is that amnesty is something that I think some right wingers sort of scoff at. But I think that we as libertarians understand that there's like these black market effects to prohibitions, and I think that the way an amnesty could play out is that it would actually be a sort of sorting mechanism, and that the people who are here, who generally want to work and live peaceful lives and aren't going to be an issue, will comply with that, and the people who won't will kind of like self-select out, and we'll be able to better focus on, I mean, again, the issue with any state program is the inefficiencies of bureaucracy and central planning, and if we're going to employ these sort of flawed and, from my view, immoral agencies towards anything, then giving them the the best sort of chance to do something good would be to like narrow their focus as much as possible. And so yeah, I think that's something that I think is worth considering. I also think that, in terms of talking about just like, I think something that people will often ask me when we're in this sort of discussion is like, like, well, what do you advocate for right now? And Amity brought up like an Ellis Island kind of thing, which I think has some merit. I also think that just to, plug the great ANCAP libertarian Hans Hermann Hoppe, he had an idea of like a sort of sponsorship system or invitee system where instead of people becoming sort of a drain on public resources, uh, and just having like unrestricted access to public property and things like that, that they could come here if they're coming to work for someone, or they're being invited by a family member, or someone who owns property here, and they kind of take, at least at the beginning, some sort of like uh, of that financial liability to kind of be responsible for this person. And again, that's not even a perfect situation just based on my principles alone. I mean, I again, as an ANCAP, as a libertarian, if we just boil this down to the individual level, I don't really believe that the state has a right to tell people where they can and can't go, as long as they are only going where like they're allowed just by the market. So like if they want to come and rent a home here or buy a home here, and they're doing it based on voluntary interactions and not coercion and not stealing, then I don't think the government has a right to tell them not to do that. I don't think the government has a right to tell immigrants or people here, by the way, that they can't homestead unhomesteaded land, which is such a, that's a violation that cuts in multiple directions right now. But I understand that, that that's the sort of society I want to see in an ideal sense. We have all sorts of distortions on the market right now that even if we ended government restriction, what would result would not be the organization of the movement of people along just purely market means. And so there are some, there's within, especially like, I think this applies to both minarchist and anarchist libertarians, but especially the more anarchistic leaning ones. Uh, some will fall into a camp which I call like they don't care about the order, like they're not a particular order uh, abolitionist. They think just cut whatever you can, whenever you can, however you can. I don't think that's quite the right way to go. I think that if you're talking about moving towards a free society, I think it makes more sense to think about the equation like a Jenga tower of sorts. Not the best analogy, but like, everything you do is going to have consequences and downstream effects. Just just the same way that state policy has that second and third order consequences that we don't that we tell, this is why we tell people we're against government regulations and infringements on the market, because it's like you don't know what the consequences are going to be. Equally true is we don't know what the consequences are to just sort of haphazardly removing those things in a bad way. A good example of this, by the way, is the '08 financial crisis when they repealed Glass-Steagall, which basically was a regulation that, along with some other ones, that kept banks from mixing certain funds at their disposal from like basic consumer funds and investment funds for the purposes of like engaging in market speculation and investment. And uh, that was like, it's a regulation, so like we're generally pro repealing regulations, but repealing that regulation while keeping a bunch of other interventions in place, like federal deposit insurance and the Federal Reserve and zero, low artificial interest rates and distortions on the ability of certain people to buy property. All of this sort of like then took a problem that already existed and then like added fuel to the fire and made it worse and ushered in the bursting of the bubble, made the bubble bigger and made it burst even worse. That's not to say that we don't advocate for the long-term abolition of all these policies, but we do have to, I think, and this applies to immigration, we do have to think about what the desired goal is and then think critically about, what's the right order in which to do things. Maybe it is better to focus on abolishing the welfare state and other social safety nets before we lower immigration restrictions. I'm open to that conversation. I do think though, like, we do need to sort of separate deportations from immigration restrictions. It's, I think, the general point I want to make here. They're related, but they're two separate conversations, because I can kind of be made to compromise a little bit on not letting the guardrails down or the levees down, so to speak. But I'm going to be pretty hard to move when it comes to deporting anyone other than those who we've, through proper due process, charged and convicted of actual criminal acts, actual acts of aggression.
Can I piggyback on that real quick?
Sure, yeah, and then I'm gonna throw it to someone else after that.
Okay, thanks. Well, Jacob was mentioning, a sponsorship program and how immigration and deportation are two different issues. And we do have a major issue right now with people who are in the country who don't have the right to work. And so they are draining our resources through welfare and other programs. Now, Rand Paul was recently on Joe Rogan, and he suggested introducing legislation where people who are here illegally, they wouldn't necessarily be given a path to citizenship, but they would be given the opportunity, if they were not violent criminals, to be given work visas and the ability to remain here. They wouldn't have the right to vote or any other rights afforded to American citizens, but they would at least be able to be, members of society who could contribute to our economy in a legal fashion rather than just draining all the resources that we have here.
Yeah, I think that's really just a really quick something I should have brought up, and Amity, you brought it up, is that like that's the other part of this conversation, is that we can also separate the idea of citizenship and the right to vote and all that from this equation too, because I'm generally pretty lenient on wanting people to come here, but I mean, just as an ANCAP, I want less people to vote, period, whether they're born here or not. I don't think that democracy is this virtue that creates a better society, or that maps on to, the more people voting, the better. So that's again another important consideration.
Okay, so I invited Daniel Mercury, who's up here as a speaker. So I'm not sure who here may or may not know who that is, but he's a candidate for governor in California. And he's actually really knowledgeable on the Constitution, both the California state Constitution and our national Constitution. So he's pretty liberty minded. He actually just had a pretty big rejection of the Republican Party, which, you know, we all applaud him for, and is very anti establishment. So I wanted to hear some of his thoughts on the immigration issues and ICE and kind of any of the things he's heard us talking about so far. Thanks for coming, Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I apologize for my voice. I literally just got over 5 days worth of heavy chest congestion. Got 3 kids, so there's not much you can do when you got touching everything in the house and coughing and sneezing. But I finally actually hit over that hill today. No, I appreciate everyone's opinion. I really do. And I understand that immigration, is such a sensitive topic. For me, foremost, I did reject recently the Republican Party. I've already submitted my 501 declaration here in the state of California to remove myself out of the Republican Party because what they say they supposedly stand for, they don't. I've been demoralized. I've been demonized. I've been attacked, character assassinated multiple times. And, they place a lot of the blame on the candidates to remove themselves, out of the race if they don't deem you at least having a million or being able to more than what they would do with their ample endorsement, which I have. But again, it has nothing to do with freedom. It has nothing to do with liberty. It has nothing to do with ensuring that we elect somebody who knows how to stay within the confines to the limitation of powers, which is by definition the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. I didn't get into this race because I wanted to be a governor. I got into this race first when I first ran for Congress. I wanted to understand why everything was falling on deaf ears and why wasn't there any expedient investigations into the criminal misconduct that we experience, throughout every state, especially more so the blue states, and why we didn't see any indictments or prosecution. No one was going to jail. And that led me down a rabbit hole of learning the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, the memoirs of our forefathers, the Magna Carta of 1215, governed by consent, and so on. And the more I started digging, the more I started realizing just how corrupt everything is based off of ignorance. I've gone down rabbit holes of court case files and so on. So some things people will agree with me and not. But I stand on the Constitution predominantly because things have already been laid out for us. So, I always go back to when we talk about immigration. If we want to be a nation of laws, that's great. We can't be so much of an anarchist that there's not an order to things. Without that, you fall into chaos. So there is a structure to that. And looking at the memoirs of our forefathers, it was obvious that they loathed democracy. So when people talk about a democracy, that tells me that there's still a level of ignorance that they really haven't understood. Because I know a democracy means that government needs come first, and then the individual rights come last. They remove God and they run the state like a business, which gets them around the laws of nature and of nature's God, which is written in the Declaration of Independence. When you live in a constitutional republic, it's God-given endowments of the individual come first. Government needs come last, and you never run the state like a business. You allow for the open and fair and free market to do what it does best, and that is be free. So when I look at the Constitution, whether I go back to the Articles of Confederation and then the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4 is the uniform rule of naturalization. So when we talk about illegals coming here, they have to go through a vetting process that has already been established, decades that's been established under Title 28, Sections 13, 24, and 25, and 26. And they're actually in alignment. And they are a process. They treat anybody who comes here illegally as a civil crime. But technically, they also fall under as an invader, which means they didn't go through due process to enter the country, which is why they are not permitted due process on the way out, including under the 14th Amendment. So when you look at the 14th Amendment, it specifies all persons born or naturalized. And you have to look at the injunction, comma, and to the jurisdiction thereof. Well, the jurisdiction only elaborates on two, those who are born and naturalized. That's it. So those who come here have to go through the vetting process under the rule of naturalization. When they bypass that, under those sections of 24, 25, and 26, they're just to be detained and repatriated. That's it. That's all it says. It's a civil crime. When they come here a second time, now it's a felony. Now here in the state of California, and I don't know what it is in a bunch of other states, and I know there's similar clauses like in Minnesota and some of the things we're saying. Section 54 actually removed the ability to take hardened criminals that I heard you all talking about to get them off the street. And that's what President Trump was talking about. But when you have sanctuary states and sanctuary cities, it removes discretion. So, in other words, here in California, whenever there was an illegal alien that was captured under some sort of crime, whether they got caught in the middle of robbing a car, invading a home, murder, whatever, if they got caught and they were on the immigration watch list, the county sheriffs were in connection with ICE to have them removed at a late hour so that it was out of the eyes and the sight of the public, so that they did not militarize our streets the way we see it now, so that they could remove the criminal, the hardened criminal, in discretion. So when the Democrats removed that, it forced everybody to see what we're seeing now. So when people say, well, we got to get, let's just focus on the criminals. You're right. I agree with focusing on the criminals first. The other ones are civil, but because of the sanctuaryism and the strife we see now, remove that discretion. So now we see what looks like military or militants on the street. So it's causing chaos, and that's purposeful by the Democrats. So things have already been put into motion decades ago, but simply removed to cause chaos. And most people don't study the laws in this direction. So now a lot of people had also gone into the fact of, well, what about amnesty? But that's the other thing. We already have amnesty. We have the Immigration Reform Act of 1986 by Ronald Reagan. We have the Central American Relief Act, I think it was in 1996 or 7. We have the Family Equity Act around the early 2000s, DACA, which was around 2012, 2013. And we already have a bunch of visas that are able for people who want to come here through corporations that can hire them however they want. I heard somebody say, you should be able to hire who you want. You're right, you should. And we already have programs like that. We've already established H-1Bs, H-2As, H-2Bs. I think we have like an EB something that's a visa. And we already have all these programs in place right now. So all we're talking about is reinventing the wheel. What we're not talking about is how are we going to organize this back into the way it was already done at a discretionary level, so that we can get back to that liberty that allows businesses to operate and hire who they want, but also allow the country to vet individuals who want to come here. As I've heard somebody say, if they can take care of themselves, that is part of the vetting process. When they go through the immigration process, that is actually some of the questions that are asked. If they have the ability to take care of themselves, do they already have a job lined up? Are they willing to go through some of these work programs before they can establish themselves? Are they coming in with their own money and they can establish themselves by simply transferring wherever country they're coming from to here as their own personal loan, utilizing US dollars? So there's already a multitude of this going on, but we keep failing to go down the laws. So this is why one of the biggest things why I left the Republican Party was, in my own state, I would stand in front of a group between a group of 5 people to 500. And I asked the question, how many of you who lived here your whole life? Almost everybody raised their hands in California. I said, great. Now, how many of you read the California State Constitution? No one. Almost no one raises their hand. So how do you know what to ask if you don't know what to ask, right? Because if you don't know the laws, there is no law. And if you don't know your rights, you have no rights. And here we're going to be here arguing here. It's legal. We have a process. Fathers knew that. They wanted to object, to a monarch, which is why we don't live in a democracy. They wrote about the loathe of democracy. And they wanted to ensure that the open market did what it does best, and that is be free, unimpinged from a monopoly that would eventually turn into an oligopoly, which is what we're experiencing right now. The unions have become an oligopoly. And when it comes to the open market, that force your politicians to sway to their needs and not the individual right. So the Republican Party here, at least in the state of California, is inept. And these people don't even know their own laws, yet they want to put somebody in office who don't actually understand what it means to ensure the liberty passed down across their children. So I absolutely adhere to freedom and liberty, but I also adhere to it cannot be so anarchist that it turns into chaos, which is what we're seeing definitely instituted and caused deliberately by the Democrats or the left wing, and I would say the Marxists, people who have infiltrated our governments on all levels, and they are Marxists, pretending and parading around as if they are constitutionalists, and they're not. They don't know the first thing about it.
Thanks, Daniel. I'll let Jacob go ahead and take the mic now.
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Daniel, for joining and for participating. And we really wanted to, hear different voices and perspectives here. Yeah, I definitely, in a future conversation, would love to talk more about what I think anarchy means, and you know, different ways of viewing government and law enforcement, but keeping things to just talking about immigration. And even though I'm an ANCAP, I do respect the Constitution and try to argue from that view, insofar as that is the way we're supposed to be governing this nation, if we're going to believe that we're a constitutional republic and that the Constitution's the law of the land. There are a couple of things there that I just respectfully disagreed with you, or maybe I misheard you, and you can clarify if I got anything wrong. Was doing my best to jot some notes down while you were speaking. But in terms of, I think you talked on like the Fourth Amendment and the 14th Amendment, and sort of saying that uh, the jurisdiction of these sort of like constitutional definitions, and the idea that the state shall not infringe upon certain people's liberties, and that they grant due process, that this doesn't apply in the case of someone who's come here illegally, because they didn't come through the correct channels, and so they no longer fall under this sort of idea of due process, because they're almost we said, like, on one hand it's like a civil crime, but also that it's technically almost like they're uh, an invader. But I guess, like, if am trying to sort of read the strongest view of what the constitutional
Right.
conservative position is,
Right.
I think these
I'll
things.
clarify
Well, let
for
me.
you.
Well, I mean, let me just.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me finish my thought here. I think that these limiting principles, and kind of the whole idea of the Constitution, is that these are not ever limits on people or rules for the citizens, so much as, like, the Constitution is sort of the binding rules for the government and for the government officials themselves. And there's also just a procedural problem, I think, here, which is that uh, if at all, what you, or at least even if you're not, what I've heard other conservatives do, when they're kind of arguing and saying due process doesn't apply here, I go, well, if you're going to make the argument that if you've come here illegally, you aren't owed due process, well, how do you know if they have come here illegally or not, unless you've done the due process? Because beyond just the constitutional view, the whole spirit of the idea of due process is that presumption of innocence. And we can't actually know if someone has come here legally or illegally unless we actually go before a judge or a jury and present the evidence, and we weigh that out. And that's kind of what the purpose of due process is for, is to actually determine, has a crime been committed, has a law been broken. So those were some of the issues I had with what you said. But feel free.
Yeah, let me clarify. I wasn't. It was the 14th Amendment, not the Fourth. So the 14th Amendment, as I said earlier, and we're talking about due process. The immigration courts don't fall under the judicial branch; they fall under the executive branch. So it's an executive decision that's already been laid out, and it was already reamped up. I think it was maybe 3 months ago, so that people knew why they weren't getting such due process was because of the vetting process that's already been laid out in those Title 28 sections that are aligned with the United States Constitution under the Uniform Rule of Natural. Go through a vetting because legal and reported illegal. Most people have.
Daniel, you're kind of breaking up for me. Can you guys hear Daniel okay? Because I can't hear him.
No, he's breaking up.
Daniel, do you have like
a
reception? Yeah, I think so. It's kind of cutting out.
How about now?
Oh yeah, that's better.
Is that better?
Yeah, go ahead. I couldn't hear the last, like, for a little bit.
Okay, so my point is that the immigration, when it comes to immigration, the immigration department for due process for illegals and those who properly migrate fall under the executive branch for immigration. They don't fall under the judicial branch, which is what we experience is under the 14th Amendment of due process. So when we talk about that process, that's for citizenry. That's for the United States citizen and born and naturalized. If they haven't gone through that, they go through the immigration process that falls under the executive branch. That's already been laid out for us constitutionally. So again, this is why I say we do have a process. So, and you say, well, how do we vet them? Well, because most of them don't have proper process paperwork anyway, as born citizenry with a birth certificate. They don't have their social securities, which is again, whether we agree with it or not, they don't have proper licensing and IDs, and or they're already given a tax ID number through sanctuary states, which sanctuary states are illegal under the Constitution. They can't be enforced, but they are. So those individuals are the ones that our ICE agents are focusing on. Once they go to the immigration court, they are further determined whether or not they came here purposely, got mixed up into the system, and or they are here illegally, and then they're to be repatriated. And so, and then if they've committed a heinous act of depravity, they usually are sentenced into either our imprisonment here in federal penitentiaries, or they're then transported to a penitentiary that's made an agreement with our federal agents and our representatives at the federal level. So there is a process to that, but it really doesn't apply to an illegal alien. You say, well, we're determined. Yes, you can. And we're reported. This is where we know through. Also, one of the biggest things too is here in the state of California, and I don't know what other states, but the way they were able to determine was by their own admittance. So in other words, through when they're brought in to sit on a jury, those individuals are asked the same question: Are you a citizen? Are you a U.S. citizen? And 85% right now over the last, I think, year, they said no. So the courts pull from voting records, they pull from the DMV, and they pull from taxes. And 85% just last year all said they were not citizens. So that made it difficult. So they kind of open up the door of whether or not they are here on a work visa, which then they're 55% of them were not. So now 55% of them opened themselves up to ICE. And so now ICE already knew, because of the databases of being interconnected. So when we say we can't determine, that's not true. We can't. And this comes from law enforcement. And so this is why we have a harem between due process and what actually attributes to those who get it as citizens and those who don't. And do they fall an invader? They do. They fall in invading and as an invader, because again, it's an occupation. Because you can't determine also if whether or not they're here to infiltrate government and or to take our money and facilitate the cartels, which they do. And that's also on record. And so this is why they fall as under invader and technically can be shifted over under a military tribunal. But we don't go that route because we've already laid out Title 28 in those sections that I spoke about. So there's already a process to this. But because we don't know it, we think, well, it's not fair. It's citizen and you're paying your tax. Not fair for us.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
we thought the argument of, and I appreciate that on that. But that's my clarification.
yeah, I mean, just I'll real quick respond, and then I think Amity wanted to say something, but yeah, I disagree with how you're interpreting the 14th Amendment, and I've heard debates on this, and but I actually have constitutional lawyers on staff with me here at LCI, and just my understanding of it, based on talking to them, is that the 14th Amendment is not, and pretty much most of the Constitution, if not all, does not make these sort of distinctions of like certain rights and protections only being for the citizenry. That, I mean, I think the actual wording of the 14th Amendment is literally says that the state shall not deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And I don't think you can just sort of like create a magical sort of, wormhole and say, well, because it's done through the executive branch, if there's not due process, I just don't think it's constitutional, no matter what branch is doing it. And again, just on the practical level, I don't know why, you or anyone, I mean, I'm sure you are someone who generally would not be trusting of a lot of these government bureaucracies and giving all these sort of like unelected people the sort of power to make a lot of these decisions without a lot of checks and balances. And so just on even beyond just the constitutional interpretation, just on the practical level and ethical level, I don't think that leaving this in the hands of law enforcement and bureaucrats to just sort of make decisions that can't be vetted I don't think that is adequate. I do think these people are owed due process. There are all sorts of uh, factors that come in here, different visas people can be on. They can have a visa that expired, even though they might have sent in the paperwork, and it's just a matter of, paper trails that need to be explored. And this is why you have to, again, I think you have to have some kind of system that is not just law enforcement and bureaucrats saying, "Trust me, bro," and like we're only going to deport the ones who are really here illegally. It's like, but the whole constitutional system is based on checks and balances, and it's based upon that we're limiting what government can do, not granting it sort of like unilateral ability to do certain things without without much oversight. And so personally, I think a lot of what we live under today, especially when the executive branch has created all these sort of like, uh, non-legislative branches and agencies and whatnot. I think I don't think those are even constitutional. So, like, if these processes are acting in ways which contradict the core of the Constitution and are not things that have been amended into the Constitution, then they're unconstitutional, and we shouldn't follow these processes just because. Uh, they're sort of put there by uh, executive fiat. There's also things you said about the H-1 visa program and whatnot. That's kind of a separate thing. I don't think that those are at all comparable to what I was advocating for, which is more of a market-based, vetting system for like if you want to hire someone. I don't think that the government has the right to sort of look at people and say like, we can sort of make the definitive claim as to whether or not this person should be approved to be hired by someone in the US who wants to hire them. That's not at all, I think, the sort of sponsorship system that I would advocate for. But just my 2 cents.
Go ahead, Amity. And then I don't know if we want to try to, after she says what she'd like to say, if we want to like go into some specific things going on with the recent events, like either like one of the shooting or Jacob and I had talked about maybe like what are the limitations of protests and protesters, what counts and what doesn't, what is actually basically against the law or shouldn't be allowed. So go ahead, Amity, and then maybe we can move into a more specific topic or a different topic, and then we could maybe call in some more people and hear some more perspectives on those other things too.
Thanks, Kara. One thing Daniel said, and I appreciate your insight, Daniel. You said that the immigration process follows the administrative or the executive, falls under the executive branch and not the judiciary. I think my issue with the current administration and how the mass deportations are going is that historically, I believe you mentioned, people would be detained and then they would be seen before a judge, which with so many people, being detained, they would just be issued a court date and they would be basically on their honor to come back. Right now, so many people are being detained in detention facilities prior to due process. So there's been cases where American citizens or people who are not citizens but have the legal right to be here have been detained for, a number of days, months, what have you, and their due process is being violated. They're being treated even worse than, the prisons that we have. They're being denied sacraments if they're Catholics. They're being denied access to attorneys. And this is one thing that I think is extremely inhumane, to treat any human this way for, the crime of just being here and existing without any probable cause of criminality whatsoever. I personally know of someone who is married to a US citizen who had a green card revoked when they attended a check-in with immigration, just because of the new policies of the new administration. So there's a lot that's going on that I believe is not constitutional, and not only not constitutional, but not humane. And I think we really need to reevaluate how we're treating human beings that are in this country.
Okay, Amity, do you want to call on somebody that you might know? I'm not sure, or we could, or I'll just pick someone randomly. I don't know who's up here.
Yeah, I guess just go with hands. If people want to raise
Okay.
their hands if they want to speak.
Yeah, we got a couple up. So let's start with Kareem.
All right. Thank you for letting me speak. Hello, Jake, Casimir, Daniel. Good stuff. So, my perspective is a little bit different. I'm not going to necessarily debate what the executive branch or what specific aspects of the government do because they are too centralized. And I think that's the problem a lot of people miss is they want to go ahead and switch systems and hope everything will work. And to me, I think the fundamental problem is the system, particularly in the fact that if you want to curb crime, if you want to curb a lot of bad immigration, I think the easiest thing to do is get rid of the welfare state, which nobody talks about. Ron Paul did talk about it in 1988. And unfortunately, the Mises Caucus, was part of kind of, drifted from that. But I really think Ron Paul's idea on immigration was the best one, where, yes, people can come and go and work, and there wasn't really a problem until we have foreign policy that dislocates people, and then they try to come here because they're getting offered benefits, which, in my opinion, should come either from private charities or not at all. And if you do those things, that will actually solve the problem. I don't necessarily think that, putting more enforcement on the ground is going to work. As we can see, it doesn't really seem to be a good idea just to intimidate people, because now, to my knowledge, we have American citizens being killed by a institution that's supposed to strictly just work on immigration. That's one problem. The other thing I would actually ask a lot of constitutionalists is, even though the Constitution had good ideas in it, is it not possible that it's not been able to restrain the government like Lysander Spooner has talked about? And maybe we should look at other alternatives like the Articles of Confederation, because I don't think you're going to see any significant change until you decentralize these power structures. So it's not just ICE. I see ICE as a symptom of the problem. The problem is that no matter who's in the executive branch, it's too centralized. And even furthermore, if somebody does cross a border, you should ask this: is it a private property border? Is it a public property? I do believe in public property. Or is it a border that is established in a community, in a covenant community, or somebody's workplace? And do they want that person there? If they do, if I want to hire someone, then I should be allowed to. And if I want to provide housing, I should be allowed to. If somebody wants to come in a community and everybody's fine with it, fine. If not, not. I know that goes against a lot of what some people have said here, but I'm taking the more radical perspective. I don't really think that that this system we're working with is actually, as we can see, working in any capacity. To me, all it has done is made people here more hostile towards each other when it doesn't have to be. So before we talk about the specific legality of the executive branch or legislation, let's try and see how we can decentralize stuff back to the states and eventually back to the local level while we're at that. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Kareem. So real quick, I was just going to say, as we're starting to bring up speakers and stuff, we think it would be best if we keep it to 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes max, if you really need a little bit more time than that, just to make sure we keep the conversation moving and as many people get to participate as possible. And I was going to let maybe Daniel respond, since I feel like there was a lot that came up addressing what he had said. Jacob, did you want to interject something real quick?
No, I was just going to mention the time limit as well. I'll keep
Oh,
the
okay.
time, and when people hit 2 minutes, I might just tell them,
Point
hey, you're at 2
warning.
minutes, and then kind of give them a minute to wrap up.
Perfect. Okay, sounds good. And then after Daniel, unless for some reason we need to throw it back to someone else, we can move to, I think Casimir's had his hand up for a while. So go ahead and you can talk now, Daniel.
Thank you. Hey, first, I just want to say thank you so much again. I really enjoy a good discourse. I really do. In fact, I can't tell you, I've been all over the state of California. There's 483 cities. I've been to 242 of them. And there's really not a lot of discourse that goes on, which is what I scream about. I'm okay when people have disagreements with me. I'm okay when people have a different perspective, whether they've done their own studying or they're taking information from somebody that they would consider to be an expert. That's fine with me. And that's really what this is supposed to be about. This is how we maintain. I don't want people to be mistaken. I agree with the fact that we are a centralized government, and it's not supposed to be that way. In fact, it was never supposed to be that way. Hence the anti-federalist papers and the whole meaning behind the Ninth and 10th Amendment. And I agree. We have too many bureaucrats that have totally disrupted the government, which we see right now. Exactly as somebody said it earlier. It's not there to grant themselves more charge. It's just been obscured or it's been hijacked. And I've learned a lot when it comes to when legislation is passed. I start to look at whether or not it's in alignment and agreement. And there are countless laws that have been enacted that are falsely operating under the color of law. They're completely out of alignment. And that was the point really with our Constitution, was to ensure that all things were in agreement, that the checks and balances were there, but that they stayed in the confines to their vested authority. And clearly most of them don't. So there's a lot of things that I agree with in that, which is the whole reasoning. Again, another reason why I left the Republican Party is because of the fact that again, nobody focuses on original intent, original indoctrination, what our forefathers wrote out and where they came from, and of course what the mess that we're in with right now. And so this has really been a very difficult pathway for a lot of people to kind of finally start digging into what's right and what is wrong. So I'm not opposed to what people are saying. They're legitimate arguments. I'm going to have my disagreements, of course, as well. When it comes to vetting, I mean, the most important thing for me is, and I come from the military background, and I'll end on this because I know I hit my 2 minute mark, is, when I've, as a military service member, I used to fly along the borders of Southern California, and we would see, the cartel lead, or the coyotes lead people of all ages, kids to grandparents, through the canyons, and then they would kill them in piles, throw them off a cliff and stuff. And a lot of these illegals are also forced here to work here as slave labor so that they can feed the cartel in other, in Mexico or in other countries too, that come in through the Los Angeles docks. In a lot of these, unfortunately, they don't actually investigate every shipping container that comes in. They only investigate, if not less than 5%. So if 100 containers come in, they're going to look at 5, and they do that on purpose. So we have a lot of corruption in all 3 branches. So I'm in agreement with, we've got a screwed up government, and we need to break it back down and get back to first the foundation, I believe, in order for us to get it right.
Awesome. Well, appreciate that, Daniel. And yeah, I'll probably reach out to you after the space is done, because there's a lot what you just said there that I agree with, and I'd love to chat with you more sometime. I am going to go ahead and call on Casimir. He is more of an ANCAP like myself. In fact, he probably makes me look like a little bit of a statist with how committed he is. And I'm also honor bound to introduce him with his full title, and anarcho-capitalist, provocateur, libertarian jurist. Debate me, bro. Casimir, how you doing, buddy? Nope. If you're there, I can't hear you. I don't know if anyone else can.
Can't hear him.
Casimir.
Right now it says he's muted. Cass,
Well, you can always
Yeah.
do the good old jump down and jump back up thing.
Yeah, Cass, why don't you jump out and come back in, and we'll try it again. That was very anticlimactic. I gave him this hyped up intro, and then completely he got completely glitched out by Twitter Spaces. Who do you know who would be next? Kara, while we're
Jake, I
waiting?
believe.
I think Austin was.
Thanks. I'd be happy to say a few words if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Austin.
I think the first thing to address is a tactical issue. I'm kind of allergic to utopianism. And the fact is that when we say the system is messed up and we start dreaming of ways that it could be better, we are not dealing in the realm of what is. We have left the Overton window behind. We've forgotten that we live in a country full of people who are statists, do not agree with our philosophy. So we need to be kind of realistic and recognize what we can and cannot achieve. It's okay to have a guiding North Star. It's okay to have really strong philosophical principles that we uphold. But those can so easily turn into a false dilemma where the perfect is the enemy of the good. And I think that happens in this conversation a lot. 14th Amendment. Should we trust the Constitution? Right now, it's all we got. And Democrats and Republicans will run to it whenever they're crying foul on the other. So it's solid ground for us, whether we think it could be better or not. So I'll start there. Whether I agree with Lysander Spooner or not is totally second to the fact that this is the way it is. The 14th Amendment specifies who is and isn't a citizen, right? Forever putting to rest the question of who makes up the body politic of the sovereign people of the United States of America. That's the idea. The problem is that we have had serious infringements on that, especially with the kind of global citizenship folks who want to say that, there is no such thing as an illegal. And I understand the premise. The problem is that there is the doctrine of popular sovereignty. And when states allow these illegals to get involved in elections and vote in them, and even if they don't vote, if we have private vendors that are representative of foreign governments, that's a whole nother issue. But that's enabled by some of these same mechanisms. So when we talk about the 14th Amendment, something important to remember is right after it clarifies who is and isn't a citizen, it then declines to use the word citizen in connection with due process. It says each person shall be entitled to due process of law, meaning even if the government arbitrarily deems that you are not a citizen, maybe they impose an oath of citizenship where you have to swear allegiance to Caesar, right? If that happens, right, and they revoke your citizenship, they could use this exact same mechanism to bypass due process and come after you. Right? So this is a nuance on this issue. I think we do have the right to enforce our political sovereignty and ensure that the members of the body politic are not being fleeced by, reverse colonization and really nefarious stuff. On the other hand, we also have to uphold due process with judicial process. And that is a defect in the way that this is currently going down. And I don't hear anybody talking about this in a way where we could unify with Republicans or Democrats or anybody. Open borders is a non-starter, right? And militarized borders is also kind of a non-starter. And so we have to be able to find that leadership position and common ground to move forward. And with that, I'll go ahead and yield the floor to someone else.
Awesome. I agree with a lot of that there, Austin, even though we might land on different things. I kind of like your framing that, like there are two extremes here. One is like, let the government, do whatever it wants, no due process, militarized borders. The other end being like open borders, anything goes under the current paradigm. And yeah, it does kind of seem like if you're advocating for either of those, that I think you've made some miscalculations in your premises. And I'm hoping that what we're doing here is conversations that will get us to something that's better than those two sort of bad ideas. Cass, are you able to speak now?
Testing. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I figured it out. I want to say amen to everything you said about me, especially the provocateur. And I came here to provoke specifically because I think one side of it is omitted. Just to be very brief, I agree with most of what Kareem said earlier. And I think that's ultimately the solution we should be advocating for, which is radical decentralization. No public property, that's nonsense, but radical decentralization, 10,000 Liechtensteins. Hopper was right about that. So that's all great. However, let's talk about present day tactics and optics and what matters. So even though I support private borders, which means open borders effectively, I don't believe that I should be talking about them. In fact, I ought shut up about the borders, should not participate in any border discussion, should absolutely not participate in a fight between Minnesota and ICE. And here's the reason why. This is something that most speakers here omitted. The tabula rasa applies to a baby. When a baby is born, you can probably convert them to any ideology you want. However, the way the world works is that parents get involved. And so 99.999, probably even a few more nines, percentage of the world around the United States is composed of evil statists that want to come here and want to do awful things to wonderful women and wonderful men like the people present in this chat. We have to recognize this. Now, we don't have the means of the state to stop them. We have to figure out other means to stop them, but we should recognize the danger we're in. And so I don't believe that the bordertarians among us are like insane. I think they're compromisers. They don't know the other options that we have. But I think in terms of the optics, we should definitely just give up on defending when there is a fight between one group of socialists and another. And you have to understand, like, what's going on in Minnesota. The tragedy in Minnesota is not that a whole bunch of Somalis are not given due process as they're being deported to Somalia. The tragedy is that Tim Walz and everybody in that government and everybody that lives there that protests ICE and the ICE agents themselves, everybody in Minnesota except a few journalists, maybe a few YouTubers, everybody else should be deported to Somalia. That's the issue that we're having. And for us to get involved in this, to say, oh, we're in favor of open borders, which side should we agree on to post memes of allyship with communists and socialists? That's really, really bad. It's really bad on optics. What we should be saying is end the Fed, like a broken record. We should be saying end the Fed. When I speak to hardcore conservatives, I completely bypass the whole border issue and I tell them the United States used to be more libertarian. Therefore, it used to be more Christian. Therefore, you would be able to deal peacefully with a person that's trying to do awful things on your streets because you would just not give them food and they would go away. And now you're forced to give them food. Therefore, you have the issue. So
you're at 3 minutes, Cass. Try to wrap it up.
We should be pushing towards what Kareem was talking about, which is decentralization, like a broken record, and not getting involved in the fights among socialists.
I agree wholeheartedly with repeat end the Fed like a broken record 100%. And I do think that's something that doesn't get talked about enough. I think earlier I was on the phone with Kara when we were kind of like preparing for tonight. I said, like, one of the things that is not talked about enough on the immigration topic is how some of the solutions are not even like directly related to immigration policy, as it were, but just coming down to just like basic economics again, that all the incentives are screwed up because of the monetary system, because of the fact that, business owners cannot discriminate properly, because of the welfare system. And so, and that just, anytime people are being oppressed financially by a broken economic system, which steals their wealth, then that's going to exacerbate tensions and promote criminality and conflict among that people, regardless of any other factors. And so, the immigration stuff's important. I think anyone can recognize that. I think Cass is one of the more open borders types who does recognize that, he doesn't think it's necessarily desirable to want millions of people from other cultures to come into the United States. But I appreciate that he's you're proposing solutions to that that don't involve relying on the state to get us out of that. I think we're going to go to Jake next. Is that right, Kara?
Yeah, so we'll go to Jake since he kind of was already about to start. And then I'd like to go to William after that.
I'll be really quick. I do agree with Kareem and Kaz quite a bit. I think there's multiple issues here. Obviously, there's not any sort of silver bullet, but I really do also really align with Austin's point of view as far as dealing with the situation we actually have instead of trying to build the utopia or trying to build the ideal of what we think it should be. Because I think even though there's some variance in what we think as far as details, a lot of us are headed the same direction as far as what we think it should be. But I think if we had to really peel back this situation in Minnesota with ICE, I really think it all goes back to corruption. And I think the biggest player here is corruption and the fact that people are used as pawns to bilk end the Fed 100%, because that's going to stop the problem at the source, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. So in the real world, if we're able to try and fight this corruption and keep people from being used as voting pawns or people being used as charity pawns or whatever you want to label it, that would stop some of these, because these people are just caught in the middle. I mean, and like Cass said, there are 99 point whatever a number of people who just want to be here, and when you treat it like this and you throw red meat to the base after you've created the problem of the corruption and all of the entitlements being completely abused and the tax-paying citizens being just bilked to the core, then you try and throw some red meat to the crowd by getting some arrests to satisfy the base and the mouth breathers. To me, the biggest issue is the corruption at the source. And yes, that would be ending the Fed, but aside from that, I don't know a solution. But the corruption is, in my opinion, the worst part of it.
Yeah, I certainly agree. There's a inordinate amount of corruption in all of this, and I think that, like, regardless, something that I would hope that almost anyone here could agree with is that even if you're for deportations and immigration restrictions, which I'm generally, I think of like the three co-hosts here, I'm probably the closest to the open borders position that really doesn't want any of this to exist. Even though I try not to be too utopian or idealistic on this, but when there's plenty of times where there's both examples of bad behavior from protesters and from ICE. There's times where protesters are clearly obstructing property, being provocative, creating conflict in ways that I think are not only not helpful, like to the cause that they're trying to advocate for, but that are like creating risky, situations that are more prone to violence occurring. And I'm not for that. But there's just also times, like, I think even, it's hard to know, but I haven't had enough time to do, like, some double checking on some facts, but, like, what happened in Minnesota, even, like, the best case scenario of what happened there looks like extreme negligence on the, on the part of the law enforcement there, at least from my view of it. And, certainly it's like a bunch of right wingers back in like the COVID lockdowns were suddenly like aware of the fact that law enforcement can engage in brutality and there's this weird power imbalance and it's hard to hold law enforcement accountable. And now it's just kind of all that's gone out the window because we're talking about immigration. And there's this other thing which really bugs me. I'll end on this. I don't want to hog the mic, but like there's just this weird celebration of like the brutality of it all. This weird kind of like we're happy to see people it's one thing to be like, I unfortunately think despite the human cost, we have to deport people. It's another thing to kind of be like cheering on the deportation and the breaking up of families. And when you see people having like violence committed upon them to kind of like celebrate that, like almost like weirdly, like I've seen conservatives like fetishizing the like watching people get brutally attacked by ICE and just like mocking them and like saying like they deserved it and just like complete dehumanization of these people, which especially as a Christian, it's like because like no matter where you fall in the political spectrum, if you're a Christian, you can't dehumanize these people. You need to view these people through the eyes of our Lord and Savior, through the eyes of our Father. And to dehumanize these people, even if you think that they're criminals and they need to be punished, that can't be the right response. And so that's really troubling to me. And that's something that's made me really critical of a lot of the people on the right now.
Okay, so we're running kind of low on time. I'd like to wrap up in about 15 minutes, maybe 20 max, but I want to get to the people who have their hands up right now. And then maybe like some closing remarks, especially from you and Amity, Jacob. So let's go to William next. Then we'll go to Daniel, Rocky, Austin. And if we have time, we'll get to you as well, Mike, since you just put your hand up. So go ahead, William. And thanks for coming.
Thank you. I'll try and make this quick. Really, two main points. Well, one, and this is somewhat minute, and I think any Christian here would agree with me, but I find myself having to remind myself of this point from time to time, even on the subject of utopia. Well, even in Kapistan is not utopia. Utopia is, well, for the Christian, it's either the Garden of Eden or the new heaven or the new earth, or neither, basically being in the presence of God. And, well, and of course we understand that since we apply economic theory to the question of how Ancapistan works. But so the second point, and so on the subject of the welfare state, I'm of the view that, and I could be changed on this potentially, that at least some welfare programs shouldn't be, say, the first thing to abolish in a hypothetical scenario where we ANCAPs controlled all of the U.S. Congress, the presidency, all of, because there was a lot of dependency. Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. You were just cutting out a little bit, and then I think we might be in close to your 2-minute mark, but go ahead and finish your thought.
Okay. Well, because of dependency, and obviously we would want to abolish, say, minimum wage laws first, and other things that, or occupational licensing. But if the goal ultimately is to create, well, okay, whether you're anarchist or minarchist, a more libertarian society, we eventually want to abolish the welfare state. Therefore, we don't want more dependency on it. So therefore, I mean, as harsh as this might be, it's not only violent criminals who we would want to keep out, it's also those who would be dependent on the welfare system, and that it would be inhumane to bring in people who will immediately, well, start another cycle of generational welfare dependency only to abolish the welfare state, which is,
yeah, I think I get what you're getting. Like,
this is part of my case for a sponsorship system.
Yeah, I think your point is well taken. There's there's sort of like creating a class of people in perpetual dependency, and just sort of like allowing unlimited access to these things. It's not, that's certainly not a good use of resources, and not properly loving your neighbor. Appreciate that, William.
Yeah, and I do think he also meant that since our goal is to abolish it, we don't want to bring in people dependent on it, and then all of a sudden go, whoop, you're on your own. I think is also part of what he was saying.
It's a tricky balance. Like, I was actually writing on the immigration stuff on our upcoming book, and it's like, because like I guess the rejoinder to that is like, well, people who are born here can be dependent upon it, and so it's like, where do you draw that line? I think it's complicated, but it's certainly a valid issue to just be concerned about. We want to be creating less dependence, to the federal government and welfare state, not more. So,
Okay, let's go with Daniel, and then Mad Rocky, you'll go after Daniel.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I want to go back to the fact that these people are caught in between. Somebody had mentioned that, and I want to actually confirm that. Running for office, I went down with a number of patriots who are unaffiliated with the parties, and we went down to the borders to, look at tent city that you don't actually see on the news in Southern California, and there are Democrat representatives from our reps or from their offices that are signing these individuals up for the Democrat Party. They give them a phone, they give them a small per diem or check, and then they get bussed out to different parts and rural areas of the state of California to offset the votes or the voter rolls. And so they purposely bring them in who don't speak English, they don't know the culture, they don't know the laws, but they are told through an interpreter, if you keep voting, Democrats, we'll make sure that you get a monthly stipend. We'll make sure that you get some education. We'll eventually get you into the system. Just keep voting Democrat. That's your only criteria. And I personally witnessed that. And these are the people who are caught in between. They don't actually know what they're doing. They just know they want to get out from wherever they're at, or they were encouraged to, or they were threatened to. And then, of course, the dead bodies that I've seen that I've had to get Border Patrol to, pick these bodies up, even bodies that had bags of cash on them. The coyote don't care. The cartel don't care because of the fact that they make more money off of the slave labor than they do someone just trying to buy their way to come across to get into America. And so it's a safety on both sides to say, as a Christian, we really shouldn't have this. I have to kind of disagree in some respect because, I can read in the Bible, I can look in, I think it's in Revelation, it talks about, the 12 gates and the borders or the boundaries and stuff. I mean, clearly even in heaven has that, but my point to that is not to, sit there and make fun or anything like that or take a jab. But if we don't actually have if we don't adhere to what has already been laid out before us, which is what we have to work with. And I know somebody said that earlier, that this is where we're at. This is the reality. And the reality is what's been laid out before us by our forefathers is completely obliterated by what we see on both parties that do to simply stem their own self-preservation. And I believe firmly that those individuals are clearly tied to these unions and to these corporatists and to these cartels that perpetuate the exact problem. They exasperate what we see to keep us emotionally divided while they themselves, they don't lose a paycheck. They don't stress. There's nothing that they do. They're out there
You're
for
2
a big
minutes,
show.
Daniel.
And so I've seen this, and I really think that this is something that, unfortunately, we don't want to talk about. And I think if we can get down to the narrowing, I think we can really get back to the foundation of things with individuals who at least will adhere to the principles that's been laid out before us. That's just my opinion.
Thanks, Daniel. Let's go ahead and go to Mad Rocky. I'll try to clear out the last two also that have their hands up, Austin and Mike, and then we'll close out after that. So just try to keep it to the 2 minutes as best as you can.
Hey guys, I am a libertarian. Probably, I'm not anarcho. I've come to the sad realization that we do need some sort of republic amongst ourselves, but we also need to be very, very, very strict about who our representatives are and what they're saying for us.
Give me 6 months. I'm just kidding.
I'm out here in California. We are living under communist rule it came in hard during COVID and it has been creeping. We are living under censorship campaigns. We have union creep into institutions that has just taken over. What's happening in Minnesota is attached to it. This is not unique to here. Now you brought something up, what we're seeing. I watched the video. I actually messaged Daniel. It was pretty early on when I saw the video and I saw what that ICE guy did and I disagreed with it. I spoke with a few people about it publicly, like where I could interject here and said, I don't really, I don't know the whole story of what happened here, but just what I see is wrong. And that right there is what kind of made me realize is this entire thing with ICE, because it's tied to elections and election fraud and money fraud, etc., this entire thing has been monetized. We're not seeing small community type things. We're not seeing empowerment on a local level, trying to actually solve real problems in our local community. we are spending our time and energy monetizing this reality television show, essentially, which is the deportation show, if you will. That is a huge issue. It makes a lot of money on both sides. Obviously, the press has its own duty to do so. I agree 100%. Is there agitators amplifying this as well? Yes. Now we're looking at war type situations, but at the same time, kind of where's the old Russian dude that was talking earlier, Casimir? We should really,
2 minutes.
especially as Christians, I mean, we need to focus on our local communities and building out what we have in our neighborhoods so that those issues don't show up in our front yards if they already haven't.
Thanks for coming up to speak and share your thoughts, Mad Rocky. Go ahead, Austin. Again, just try to keep it to the 2 minutes as best you can because we're getting to the end.
I'll try to be swift. As Christians, I just want to kind of exhort everybody to be aware of the hour in which we live, whether you accept a futurist view of eschatology or not. We are in an age of deception. We are in an age where it's possible for things to happen that were never thought to be literal. And I think that's worth noting and worth paying attention to. This is the marks of a color revolution. And by that, I don't just mean a pro-democracy revolution. I mean an intelligence agency assisted operation that uses psychological warfare and non-kinetic warfare to try to overthrow a regime. So I think that what we're seeing right now is extremely dangerous. And, you know, we see people even in our own ranks who are calling for violence. And the reality is nobody questioned whether or not we should maintain our own national sovereignty and do basic border policy in the main line until recently. And that's only because there is a kind of world war underway. So remember, like Brother Jacob said, that people are humans and that the dividing line that matters to God is not which political side you are on, whether or not you're an anarcho-capitalist or a libertarian. He's looking at whether or not you follow him, and that flows out in how you treat other people. And that's true, you know, and right now it's really hard. If you make a balanced criticism of a situation and you say somebody's hero is at fault, they will immediately throw you into the you're pro-ICE, you want to, you know, torture these people. And on the other hand, if you make a balanced criticism of ICE, they say, oh, so you're open borders and you want to overthrow the United States with the communists. So,
I don't know if I'm interrupting anybody, but I can't hear anything, so I just want to make sure
Oh, I can hear him.
everyone else is still connected.
I can hear him.
Can you?
no worries. No worries. Yeah. So anyway, I'll wrap it up. I appreciate you guys, and it's really important that Christians stay involved and remember that what unites us is bigger than politics, and those are the principles that lead us to libertarianism. And you know, keep that first. Most practical thing you can do in politics is to convert your neighbor. I yield.
Appreciate that, Austin. Who I think we're going to Mike next. Are you there?
Hey, everyone. Thanks for, I'm here. I just kind of wanted to, I definitely agree with the fact that on immigration, that it's caused by not only the welfare state, but, you know, the perpetual regime change wars and constant interventions that cause mass migration, you know, not only in America, but across the world. I kind of just wanted to bring light just to the 2025 statistics that we just have, especially with the self-deportation program and the CBP Home app. So with that, not only are people given a plane ticket, $2,500 in amnesty so they can return legally and obtain citizenship in the future, but 1.9 million people, based off the government statistics, self-deported last year alone. ICE only got at the highest end 600,000. So I feel like the answer is almost right in front of our face. We could easily just take the funding away from ICE, put it towards the CPP Home app, and then abolish sanctuary states. And it's the most humane way to give people actual amnesty and a path and even funding to obtain legal citizenship, especially because if you get rid of the sanctuary states and you actually have the states reporting citizenship status for criminals, that also coupled with the CPP Home app could just solve the problem very humanely without all of these optics that ICE is just giving us by invading all these cities. That's just all I wanted to share.
Awesome. Appreciate that, Mike. Appreciate you all being here. The Kara's having some technical difficulties, and we're over time anyway, so we're gonna wrap this up, but we're definitely going to do a part 2 to this because we only really scratched the surface of what we wanted to talk about tonight, but it was just really good to get all of you up here and involved and engaged. And this is the kind of conversations I think that need to be happening among Christians, among people who care about the values of our country, of our founding, of for liberty, of individual liberty and personal responsibility, human flourishing, and so definitely we'll be doing a part 2 to this real soon. Thank you, Amity, for co-hosting. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we will make sure you follow all of us up here on the host panel, the Christian Caucus. You can follow me at Biblical Anarchy, and also follow what we do over at the Libertarian Christian Institute. And I'll see you because he's also here. Make sure you follow Free. Are You Smarter Than a Politician? Best libertarian game show that exists. Might be the only one, but either way, it's the best. And I will be hopefully back on soon to get a third shot at a victory. Anyway, thank you guys. I'm going to tell Kara to go ahead and close us out. She can't hear us, but I can message her on the back end. So we'll be closing out here in a minute then.
Thanks for having us. Aloha.
All right. And now it's just me on the YouTube end. So I'm going to go back to the full screen layout. Appreciate you guys tuning in for this. This went better than the last one of these I did. Didn't have any, no technical difficulties on my end. This time Kara had issues towards the end, but that's the problem with the medium like X. The spaces thing is a little bit janky, but it's a good way to engage with people. We did have one super chat. I'm going to read the super chat. If anyone wants to add any more questions, I'll respond to them here over the next 5 minutes before I close out. We had one from Griffin Gaming 4474 for $5. Thank you. He said, I feel like ICE in Minnesota is a distraction as Trump prepares to invade Iran, and that doesn't make what's happening wrong, just an observation. Yeah, I feel like there's always an element of actually, it's like I think simultaneously there are real things happening and they're almost co-opted to be psyops because the expression is no good crisis goes to waste, right? And so absolutely the state will, sort of use its tentacles and reach it has in media and influencers to take something real that's happening and then tell them, sort of the way to spin it, the way to talk about it, the way to grab as much attention as they can if they know that that's going to sort of get the eyes of the people paying attention to things off of another area where they want to do some things. And I'm very concerned about what's going on in the Middle East and with Iran in particular. And foreign policy, I think I said earlier in the spaces that, there's obviously a lot of overlap between these issues. Like we should never view any issue, whether that's immigration, monetary policy, criminal justice reform, the war on drugs, the foreign policy and war, free trade. None of these things are sort of like issues that you view in isolation or in a vacuum. Everything interacts with everything else, and certainly there's a sort of like unexplored, at least in this episode, there's an unexplored connection between the warfare state and the immigration crisis. A sort of like bomb the world, invite the world agenda. And it doesn't really benefit anyone. Doesn't benefit the American people. Doesn't benefit the people over in the Middle East or in South America. Doesn't benefit the immigrants, at least not most of them in the long run. But it does benefit those in charge. It does benefit the people who stand to make a profit or to uh, grow their political power and reach and influence. And so we we have to do this diligently, but we do have to try to connect dots responsibly and understand that there are greater forces at play. You know, the Bible says we don't struggle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and the forces of darkness and heavenly forces. And there's spiritual warfare that's always going on behind the scenes with a lot of these things. And I think politics is often a manifestation of a lot of this. And there's a lot of dehumanization, as I said earlier, that's happening along all of these lines. And I think that is the impulse that, like, there can be some wiggle room and disagreement on political issues as Christians. But when we're giving into sort of the dehumanization of people, I think we are no longer uh, letting our heart and our judgment of people be guided by Scripture and the Holy Spirit, but we're being ruled by another force and not a godly one. So, but yes, foreign policy, what's going on there is certainly important and will be the focus of upcoming streams as well. The Epstein files, the whole thing. It's another thing. It's like there's always the next thing, right? And the government kind of we're living in a new age of government propaganda where they kind of know that the people are growing kind of like uh, tuned to the fact that the government lies to us and is corrupt. But it's like now the game is sort of to move the ball and take advantage of people's attention spans and take advantage of the fact that people are sort of stuck in a bit of a rat race because of the sort of the economic reality of all of this. People like even myself, right? Like I have 5 kids to take care of. It's like, can I keep up with everything that's going on and maintain my vigilance, or do I have to, put in extra time working to provide for my family? And the incentives are to sort of suck it up and just retreat inward and only care about your own. And then certainly it would be wrong. Like I'm not telling people they should like quit their jobs and become full-time activists. But these things aren't in actual tension because while I need to provide for my family and their security, both financially and physically and their needs, long term, the greatest threat to my family is the state, is all the ways in which the government disrupts voluntary human relationships and interactions and free market mechanisms and creates a constant state of conflict and artificially induced, like beyond just natural scarcity, artificially induced scarcity, and uh, just putting people in the position of having to act with a higher time preference than they otherwise would have to. So anyway, that's where I'm going to end things for now. But I appreciate you guys tuning in for this. Please make sure you like this video for those of you who watched on the YouTube end. Uh, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're here in the green room every Monday evening typically. And so we'll be back again next week. I don't have a guest lined up yet, but actually, no, I'm lying. I do have a guest lined up for next week. So next week will be the 2nd of February, and that'll be a crossover green room. I will be live with the Liberty Dad podcast, and that is with my and I'm blanking on his name. I'm sorry, bro. I was kind of filibustering there to try to remember your name, but you get to a point where you just know too many people, and there's like people that you know really well, but you just kind of like get a brain fart. You're just like, so hold on, I'm gonna look it up here real quick because I feel really bad now. DL Cummings. So on his show, the Liberty Dad Pod, along with Adam Coleman and with Tyler Jenke from the Libertarian Podcast Review, we started up recently this sort of fatherhood kind of like dad roundtable podcast. And so that kind of like multi streams to both of our channels. And so that'll be next Monday at 8 o'clock Eastern time. So make sure you tune in for that. That'll be a great conversation. Culture is, of course, sort of the long-term solution to all of this. Is I think creating a free society starts with creating free individuals, which starts with raising up individuals and as parents who know what it means to be free in every sense of the word. Free financially, free in terms of not viewing themselves as a sort of enslaved to the system or to the state, and then the ultimate freedom that comes through the gospel, through Christ, and being joined to the church through baptism. So that's all I have for you guys. As I always conclude by saying, live at peace, live for Christ. Take care.